The day I found my mother's hidden bank account, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the walls shift around me, as if the house I grew up in had finally taken off its mask. My name is Amber. I'm 29. And last month, my grandfather left me everything. Not just the money, though that was substantial. He left me his estate, his business holdings, the house with the stone fireplace where we used to watch storms roll in. He left me the weight of legacy, and the key to a truth I wasn't meant to uncover. The morning after his funeral, my mother demanded I sign the will over to her. She said, "This isn't yours, Amber. You know that." I replied, "It is now." That was the moment everything changed. That was when she turned. She didn't shout. She smiled, slowly, like someone about to slice through a cake at a funeral. And then she began to plan. This morning, I received a text. A family meeting. No details, just a time and an address, the house I grew up in. My grandfather's house, which was now legally mine. I walked through that door knowing I was walking into something. I just didn't know what. They were all there, my mother, my stepfather Craig, my siblings Rachel and Jason. And two men I didn't recognize, in sleek suits that didn't belong in our family's world. My mother's voice was smooth, almost kind, "Meet our lawyers." What happened next, I can't even describe. Not because I'm protecting anyone, but because part of me still can't believe they actually tried to steal everything. Legally. Publicly. With documents and signatures and a list of claims so absurd it would have been funny, if it hadn't been aimed at me. They'd been preparing this for months. The will had been filed. The accounts were in my name. The estate transferred. But somehow, they thought they could reverse it. They thought they could pressure me, intimidate me, into giving it all away. And it might have worked. Except for one thing. They didn't know I had already found her account. My mother's account. The one she hid. And what was in it wasn't just money. It was proof. The kind that changes everything. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I just sat there in that room, letting them talk, letting them believe I was the same girl who used to beg for attention. The one who always said yes. The one who stayed quiet. That girl is gone. And what comes next? I don't think they're ready for it. Because this story doesn't end with their lawyers. It begins with mine. My mother always knew how to command a room. But that day, watching her weaponize calm like a scalpel, I realized just how far she'd go to rewrite history. They kept talking. Words like undue influence, mental decline, reallocation. Legal jargon cloaked in concern. All aimed at me, or rather, at what I represented now. The sole inheritor. The living embodiment of a choice my grandfather made with full clarity and deliberate care. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I could feel the pressure behind my eyes, not from emotion, but from restraint. Letting them finish. Letting them expose themselves without interruption. Eventually, I stood. "I'll have my lawyer respond," I said simply. Then I left. I walked out the way I'd come in, back through the front hallway where I once learned to tie my shoes. Past the staircase where I used to sit and listen to my grandfather take business calls, his voice low and certain. Past the old photo of my grandmother in her wedding dress, which someone had replaced in a new, garish silver frame I'd never seen before. I drove straight home, locked the door behind me, and sat on the floor with my laptop open on the rug. The quiet buzz of it felt almost sacred. The file I'd found the night before, the one my mother never meant for anyone to see, was still there, open, waiting. It was disguised as a travel budget. Hidden inside a folder labeled Summer Plans. But it wasn't a vacation fund. It was a bank account. A private account registered under my mother's maiden name, with wire transfers going back years. Every quarter like clockwork. Always the same amount. Always from the same source, a business subsidiary my grandfather owned outright. I'd never heard of that company. It wasn't listed in the will. Wasn't mentioned during probate. But the funds had moved quietly, steadily, for almost a decade. Over $380,000. Gone. Redirected. Rewritten into shopping trips and cosmetic procedures and silence. She never told anyone. Not my stepfather, not my siblings. It was hers. Stolen, yes, but protected like something she believed she deserved. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt something colder. Something I couldn't name yet. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the slow unraveling of a mythology. Because the truth is, I used to admire her. Not as a mother, exactly. But as a woman who survived things. She raised 3 children mostly alone after her divorce from my father. She endured public embarrassment, financial ruin, the kind of whispers that echo for years in small towns. I used to think that required strength. But strength without values is just coercion. And survival, if it comes at the cost of everyone around you, isn't resilience. It's conquest. My grandfather knew that. He saw it play out for decades. He'd once told me, entitlement is the enemy of legacy. Now I understood what he meant. She believed she deserved it, not because she earned it, but because she needed it. And in her world, needing something was always justification enough. But what I didn't understand yet was why he kept funding her in secret. Why he didn't cut her off. Why he protected her with one hand and wrote me into the will with the other. The contradiction haunted me. So I went back. Not to her, not yet, but to the documents he'd left behind. The ones I hadn't fully studied. The dusty folders and handwritten notes he kept locked in the safe at the back of his study. I'd opened it briefly the week after the funeral, too overwhelmed to process the contents. But now, I made tea, turned off my phone, and sat at the desk he built himself from salvaged oak. There were 5 folders. One labeled investments, one family. The third was store operations, filled with ledgers from decades past. The fourth, letters, was mostly handwritten notes I couldn't bring myself to read yet. But the last folder was labeled contingency. Inside were printouts. Statements. Photocopies of bank wires, notarized letters, even screenshots from what looked like private correspondence. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. My name written on the front. In his handwriting. I didn't open it. Not yet. I needed to know what kind of man he truly was before I let his words back into my body. Because a part of me, the child still clinging to the myth of our closeness, was afraid. Afraid I'd find a justification. A defense of her. Afraid he'd ask me to forgive her. That night, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in my hand. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. Amber. If you're reading this, then the storm has started. You will hear many versions of me. Stories twisted by disappointment or envy. Don't waste time correcting them. The account exists because I made a mistake. I thought enabling your mother would eventually create stability. I was wrong. She did not steal from me. I gave her too much. Repeatedly. Because guilt, I've learned, is a cowardly form of love. But you see money clearly. Not as power, but as protection. I've seen it in your choices. Do not share it. Do not apologize for it. And do not let them shame you into surrender. What you have now is not a reward. It's a responsibility. And there's more. Ask Josephine. Love always. Grandpa. My hands trembled. Josephine. The name barely registered until I remembered she'd been his assistant for over 20 years. Kind, efficient, discreet. She'd retired 2 years ago and moved out to Oregon to be near her grandchildren. We'd exchanged letters once, short, polite updates. But I hadn't spoken to her since. Now I would. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, heart pounding with something I couldn't define. I wasn't alone in this. And if Josephine held more pieces of this puzzle, I was going to find them. I just didn't know what I'd uncover. Or what it would cost. The hardest part isn't the betrayal. It's realizing how long you were willing to doubt yourself just to preserve someone else's image. I found Josephine through an old address book my grandfather kept in the drawer beneath the safe. No phone number listed, just an address in Corvallis, Oregon, written in that careful handwriting he used for things that mattered. I mailed a letter the next morning, brief, direct, respectful. I didn't ask for answers. I asked for clarity. It felt like pressing my palm to the surface of still water, waiting for ripples. 3 days passed before her reply arrived. A small envelope, a single sheet of paper, her writing precise and clean. Dear Amber. I hoped he would give you the letter. Yes, there's more. I won't send it through the mail. But if you're willing, I'd be honored to speak with you. Here's my number. Warmly. Josephine Hale. I called that evening. She answered on the second ring, her voice exactly as I remembered, soft, measured, the cadence of someone who has spent decades keeping confidences. She said, I was wondering how long it would take. I replied, I think I knew something was wrong before I even found the folder. We spoke for 40 minutes. She didn't rush. Didn't dramatize. She told me facts. That my grandfather had rewritten his will 3 years before he passed. That he'd set up a trust, not for my mother, not for my siblings, but for the employees of his company. A long-term profit-sharing plan they weren't supposed to know about until next year. That the business wasn't failing, despite what my mother had claimed at the funeral. And then she said the thing that made me go still. Your mother visited me, 6 months before he died. I didn't speak. She asked me for the password to his accounts. Said she needed to protect the family. She was crying. I waited. I told her no, of course. But the next day, someone accessed his personal email. It wasn't him. So she suspected. Maybe couldn't prove it, but suspected. And I could hear it in her voice, the guilt, quiet and clean. She'd kept it all inside, like she was still protecting him. Before we hung up, she gave me one last name. Alan Mendez. His attorney. Not the one who handled the probate. The one who helped him establish the business trust. The documents were filed out of state. Nevada. For privacy. Josephine didn't know the details. But she knew he'd instructed Alan to prepare for resistance. It was his way of saying, they're going to come for this. And now I understood what he meant. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. I ended the call, thanked her sincerely, and sat in the silence that followed, staring at the now familiar folder labeled contingency. That's when the texts began. First Rachel. Mom says you're spiraling. Are you okay? Then Jason. Can we talk? Just us? This doesn't feel right. They came in sequence, carefully timed, clearly coordinated. The shift was unmistakable. Tactics, not concern. I didn't respond. By the end of the night, there were 9 messages. A few missed calls. One voicemail, from my stepfather Craig. He said, Amber, sweetheart. I know emotions are high, but this isn't the way. We're family. Come home. Come home. As if that house still belonged to them. As if history hadn't shifted beneath their feet. I forwarded everything to my attorney. Her name was Emily Tate, a woman I'd met once at a business conference, years ago. She'd given a presentation on estate litigation and I remembered thinking, she doesn't posture. She waits. She watches. I sent her an email that night with a subject line that simply read, I need to understand what I'm up against. She called me the next morning, direct and steady. Asked no unnecessary questions. Told me what to scan, what to copy, what to preserve. You're not imagining any of this, she said. I didn't cry. But I remember holding the phone to my chest afterward and feeling something shift inside me, not relief, not anger. Just confirmation. They were never going to let me keep what he gave me. Not because they needed it, but because they couldn't stand that it wasn't theirs. The next week was slow attrition. Emails from the family lawyer requesting clarity on your intentions regarding asset division. A courier envelope delivered to my door with a revised will, not my grandfather's, but a forged document dated 6 months earlier, laughably inept, signed in a pen he hadn't used since 2014. Jason showed up unannounced. I didn't open the door. He left a note in my mailbox that read, "We're not the enemy. Don't let them turn you into a stranger." But I wasn't the one turning. I was returning. To who I'd always been, the quiet one, the one who listened before she acted, the one who never interrupted but always remembered. And what I remembered now was this: they didn't object to the inheritance because they believed I couldn't handle it. They objected because I already had. I scheduled a video call with Emily. We spent 2 hours going over everything: the accounts, the transfers, the old will, the suspicious document, the trustee contacts, and, finally, the trust Josephine mentioned. She confirmed it existed. It was airtight. My mother wasn't listed. Neither were Rachel or Jason. Only me. As executor. It was the part they hadn't anticipated. Because in their minds, I was still the girl who sat quietly at the edge of the room, watching everyone else fight over the last word. They hadn't noticed the way I'd listened. The way I'd learned. Emily leaned forward on the screen. She said, "They're going to escalate. Be ready." I nodded. She added, "They'll try to make you feel like you owe them peace. Like unity is more important than truth." I replied, "They've been doing that my whole life." She didn't argue. I slept soundly that night for the first time in weeks. Not because anything was resolved, but because I had chosen my path. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't control. It was clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is its own form of power. The next morning, I drove to the post office and mailed something to each of them. Identical envelopes. No threats. No accusations. Just a certified notice, signed and notarized. An official update on the trust, with a brief explanation of my legal role. I wasn't asking for agreement. I was informing them. I returned home, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. There was one more thing I hadn't done. One more piece I'd avoided, until now. The account access. My mother's. Buried beneath layers of passcodes and old encryption, the statements had already told one story. But there were emails attached. Dozens. Receipts. Correspondence. And one, flagged and saved, from a sender I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "About the wire instructions, discretion required." I opened it. And what I found inside changed everything. Not just the amounts. Not just the hidden names. But the implication of where the money had come from. And who else had helped her move it. The lies were bigger than I thought. And I wasn't alone in uncovering them anymore. The first time you hold proof in your hands, real proof, not suspicion, not instinct, something inside you breaks and reforms at the same time. I stared at the email for over a minute before I moved. The language was careful, coded, but not careful enough. It was dated 7 months before my grandfather passed. The sender was someone named Kenneth Wright, with a law firm I didn't recognize. The tone was transactional, almost bored, as if orchestrating silent thefts was just another Tuesday. The email referenced the quarterly arrangement, maintaining discretion for both parties, and most damning of all, ensuring no connection to the trust documents filed in Nevada. That was it. The missing link. It wasn't just about her hiding money. It was about her diverting funds away from the trust my grandfather had created for his employees, for the business legacy he spent a lifetime building. The money she took wasn't hers. It wasn't even his. It belonged to people who had no idea they were being robbed. I closed the laptop and sat with my hands folded for several minutes. Not in shock, I'd passed that point. It was something colder. Something like mourning, but for clarity. The kind that strips illusion so thoroughly that you don't know who to call anymore. Not even to grieve. I didn't need to confront her. I needed to prepare. That week, I drove out to the main office of my grandfather's company. It was 2 hours south, in the town where he opened his first store. I hadn't been back there since the funeral. But walking through the front doors, I felt something tighten in my chest, not dread, exactly. More like obligation. The kind you can't put down, no matter how tired you are. The receptionist looked up, startled at first, then smiled gently. Her name tag read Carla. She looked about 60, with the weary warmth of someone who'd worked the same job through 3 different managers and still remembered where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. She said, "You look just like him when you walk." I paused. She added, "He used to come in early on Fridays. Made his own coffee. Said it cleared his head." I nodded and introduced myself. She didn't ask why I was there. She just picked up the phone and called someone named Dean. 10 minutes later, I was seated in a small glass-walled office across from a man in his late 40s with sleeves rolled up and crow's feet he didn't try to hide. Dean McCarthy, operations lead for the last decade. He said, "We've been expecting this." I raised an eyebrow. He continued, "Not you, necessarily. But someone." After Harold died, there was silence. No word from your mother, no inquiries. And then, slowly, the budget changed. Approvals disappeared. Bonuses were cut. He pulled a folder from his drawer. It was already prepared. "I've been keeping notes," he said quietly. Didn't know who to send them to. I took the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, interoffice memos, chain of command approvals that had gone missing. Expense reports that didn't match the accounts. "You think it came from the top?" I asked. He shrugged, but his eyes were certain. "There's only one way to access those approvals," he said. "And it wasn't us." I thanked him, asked permission to make copies, and promised I'd be in touch. Back home, I sent everything to Emily, including the original email from Kenneth Wright and the internal documents Dean had given me. She responded within hours. "This is more than inheritance fraud. We're looking at criminal misappropriation, possible embezzlement. Keep everything backed up. Don't contact her." "Not yet." I followed her instructions to the letter. Meanwhile, the silence from my family became something worse, a soft campaign of revision. Rachel posted vague quotes on social media about betrayal and greed masquerading as grief. Jason called again, left a voicemail that started with "We miss you" and ended with "This is tearing mom apart." But they didn't know what I knew. Didn't know what she'd done not just to me, but to the company, the employees, the trust that was supposed to outlive all of us. I began preparing for the next phase. Quietly, thoroughly. Emily connected me with a forensic accountant, Dana Ng, a calm, precise woman who reminded me of a piano teacher I once had, direct, impossible to manipulate. Dana reviewed the documents and called me after 3 days. She said, the account was split across 4 subledgers. One fed into personal expenses. Another into a shell company registered to a Delaware address. The third is the one I think you need to see. I met her in person that Friday. She handed me a printout. I scanned the first line and froze. The third account had been funneling payments to someone listed as a consultant, at a rate of $8,000 per month. The name? Craig Stoddard. My stepfather. I didn't flinch. Didn't gasp. I just nodded and kept reading. The deposits began 2 years ago. Small at first. Then larger, regular, methodical. There was no consulting work listed. No invoices. No project files. Just the payments, marked confidential. They weren't just complicit. They were coordinated. My mother had set up the channel. Craig had used it. And together, they'd drained over $160,000 from the company, under the radar, buried beneath layers of unrelated transactions. It was no longer a family dispute. It was theft. I asked Dana if she could keep going, trace the Delaware registration, find out what the shell company was actually doing. She nodded. I stepped outside and sat in my car for a long time without turning the key. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, exactly. Just that I wasn't the girl they'd raised. That girl would have apologized. Would have tried to keep the peace. Minimized it. Looked for a way to make it go away quietly. But I was past quiet now. Silence, I've learned, is not the same as peace. And truth, once you find it, demands something from you. That night, I pulled the old business ledgers from my grandfather's home office, the ones he kept in the safe, beside the will. I hadn't opened them yet. I hadn't been ready. Inside were 3 decades of notes. Margins scribbled with reminders. Employee birthdays. Vendors he trusted. Deals he walked away from. It was a map of how he made decisions, not just financially, but ethically. He'd written next to one entry. Trust only those who gain nothing from your silence. I wrote it down and folded the note into my wallet. Because the silence had gained them everything. Until now. Emily emailed me the next morning with a timeline and a plan. I was ready. Not for war, I wasn't interested in spectacle. But for something quieter. Stronger. The kind of justice that doesn't scream. It signs papers. It freezes accounts. It answers every whisper with documentation. And it doesn't knock on doors. It changes the locks. The only thing left was the meeting. And this time, I'd be the one calling it. Some confrontations feel like collisions. This one felt more like surgery, cold, deliberate, necessary. I scheduled the meeting through Emily. No surprises. No dramatics. Everyone was notified formally, with dates, times, and documentation. A neutral location, her office conference room downtown. Mid-morning on a Tuesday. No one could claim they didn't have time to prepare. I arrived early. Sat in the corner, reviewing my notes not because I needed to, but because it steadied my hands. Emily was already there, setting up, calm as always. Dana joined us with a thin binder tucked beneath her arm. Everything was documented, organized, unshakable. At 10:02, they arrived. My mother entered first, flawless in appearance, as always. She wore a pale gray suit I recognized, one she'd bought on a trip to Paris my grandfather had paid for, back when she still pretended to care what he thought. Behind her, Craig. Quiet. He looked older than I remembered, as if the weight of consequence had already begun to settle. Rachel followed, hesitant. Jason came last, avoiding my eyes. No one spoke. Emily gestured to the seats. The table stretched wide between us, not enough to feel safe, but enough to give the illusion of distance. She began the meeting with formalities. Introduced Dana. Outlined the agenda. Explained that we were here not to negotiate, but to clarify. Then she slid a folder across the table to my mother. Inside were the findings. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Screenshots. Dates. Names. Dana spoke only when needed, succinct, clear, devastating. My mother didn't open the folder right away. She just stared at it like it might ignite. Craig glanced at it once, then looked away. Rachel looked confused. Jason looked furious, but not at me. At something else. Maybe at the fact that he was finally seeing what I'd been carrying. Emily said, "These documents establish a pattern of misappropriation of company funds by both Patricia and Craig Stoddard, over a period of approximately 26 months. My mother's lips barely moved. She said, "This is a mistake." Dana responded, "The numbers are verifiable." Silence. Then my mother laughed, softly, bitterly. The kind of laugh people use to buy time. She said, "He gave me that money." "You don't understand." I replied, "You're right. I don't understand how you convinced yourself of that." Her eyes snapped to mine. For a moment, the room felt smaller. Then Emily slid the second folder across. The one with the internal memos. The forged approvals. The shell company registered in Delaware. She said, "We've also uncovered an unauthorized channel of transfers that implicates Craig directly. Listed here as a consultant for a non-existent firm." Craig didn't speak. My mother did. She said, "You've always resented me. This is just your way of getting back." I didn't flinch. I said, "I didn't make these transfers." "You did." She turned to Jason. She said, "Are you really going to sit there and let her tear this family apart?" Jason looked at me, then back at her. He said, "I don't know what's worse, what you did, or how long you thought we wouldn't find out." That was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to register. The family line she'd held so tightly began to fracture, not because I attacked it, but because the truth didn't need defense. Rachel reached for the folder. Her hands were shaking. She opened it. Flipped through the pages slowly, her face tightening with every line. She whispered, "I thought you said the money was from Dad's life insurance." My mother's face didn't change. She said, "I did what I had to do to protect this family." I replied, "No. You did what you had to do to control it." Emily leaned forward. She said, "We are prepared to pursue civil charges, and if necessary, criminal referrals." She paused. "However, if restitution is made voluntarily, and the trust is restored, we are willing to negotiate terms that avoid escalation." The room went still. No one moved. Then my mother reached for her purse. She said, "I need a moment." She stood, walked out, her heels echoing down the hall. Craig didn't follow. He just sat there, staring at his hands. I turned to him. I said, "You knew." He didn't deny it. He said, "She told me it was temporary. That he would have wanted it this way." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. 15 minutes later, my mother returned. Her face had shifted, not softer, not harder. Just empty. She said, "You'll get your restitution." Emily nodded. She added, "And your public statement?" My mother looked straight at me. She said, "You want me to admit this? In front of everyone?" I answered, "I want you to stop pretending." That was the end of the meeting. There were signatures. Agreements. Deadlines. When it was done, they stood and left, one by one. Craig last. He looked back once, as if trying to memorize something. Only Jason stayed behind. He said, "I didn't know." I replied, "I know." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first." I nodded. That was enough. After he left, I stayed in the room with Emily and Dana. We didn't speak for several minutes. Emily finally said, "You handled that well." I looked at her and said, "I didn't handle it. I survived it." She smiled, gently. Not pride, respect. When I walked out of the building, the sky had shifted. Clouded over. I didn't mind. Because I wasn't walking away from the fire. I was walking towards something else entirely. And I wasn't alone anymore. The relief didn't come the way I expected. It didn't arrive like a breath or a sunrise. It came like a slow loosening, the grip of something I hadn't realized was clenched for years. The days after the meeting passed in quiet motion. Legal confirmations. Digital filings. Transfers finalized. I signed the documents with calm precision, sitting at my grandfather's old desk, beneath the faded photograph of him shaking hands in front of his first store. His smile in that photo wasn't pride. It was resolve. Restitution arrived in segments. The funds returned to the trust. The stolen amounts accounted for. Craig's consultant payments ceased. The Delaware Shell Company was formally dissolved, its remaining assets redirected to employee pensions. Emily oversaw it all with methodical grace. My mother never called. She sent her statement through her lawyer. A flat, carefully crafted paragraph submitted to the Board of Trustees and the company's internal communications team. It accepted misjudgments. It acknowledged regret. But it never named the truth. She never used the word theft. Or betrayal. Or daughter. I didn't need her to. I read the statement once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. Not out of sentiment. Just because some things belong filed, not revisited. Rachel stopped responding to messages. Not hostile, just absent. I think she needed distance. From me. From the shame. From whatever version of our mother she'd built her life around. Jason checked in once, quietly. Just a short message. I hope you're okay. I replied, I am. We didn't say more. The board convened a week later, quietly reinstating the original trust leadership. They asked me to remain as executor, not out of obligation, but because they trusted the clarity I brought. I agreed, with a single condition: quarterly transparency reports for all employee beneficiaries. No more secrets. That was the promise I could make. I spent the next month cleaning out the house. Not the one I lived in. The one that used to be hers. The one I had inherited. The room still smelled like her perfume, expensive, sharp, unmistakable. I opened every window. Let the air change. Not to erase her. Just to remove her grip. The kitchen was the hardest. So much performance happened there. So many evenings where she smiled at guests while privately grinding her discontent into everyone around her. It was a room of appearance. I wanted it stripped bare. I hired a local crew to repaint it. Pale slate, softwood tones, no more sterile marble or showy gold fixtures. I removed the chandelier she'd installed after the third refinancing and donated it to a resale charity. When the work was done, I stood in the entryway and realized it no longer looked like a shrine to someone else's ego. It looked like a home again. I didn't decide to stay. But I needed to make it livable. For now. The company sent out its quarterly memo with the trust updates. Several employees replied to thank me. One woman sent a photo of her daughter at college orientation. She wrote, "This is what your grandfather built. And you protected it." I sat with that message longer than I should have. Let it sit heavy and warm in my chest. Because she was right. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the way money moves, through rooms, through generations, through choices. And how easily it becomes something else entirely if no one's watching. The court didn't press criminal charges. Emily had warned me that was possible. The restitution satisfied most requirements. And there were no public complaints filed, no employees harmed directly, no lawsuit waiting to surface. But I filed an internal ethics grievance anyway. Quiet, procedural, formal. I needed it documented. I needed the company history to reflect not just what was corrected, but what had been allowed to happen. It was reviewed. Accepted. Noted in records. That was enough. Craig moved out of state. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he found work at a smaller firm, far outside our region. The kind of quiet retreat that men like him seek when they've lost too much credibility to stay. My mother stayed put. I don't know where she lives now. But the last address listed was a condo paid for in full, purchased just weeks before the confrontation. It had been frozen briefly. Then released once the funds were traced and the trust restored. She got to keep it. I didn't fight that. Let her keep a roof. Let her sit beneath it and wonder what else could have been kept, if she'd made different choices. I returned to my own apartment. It was still there, still humble, still mine. I hadn't furnished it lavishly even after the inheritance cleared. I didn't want excess. I wanted silence. A place to think. The first night back, I unpacked my grandfather's ledgers. Stacked them neatly on the bookshelf, beside the old photographs. Then I opened the window, sat with a cup of tea, and listened to the city breathing. I wasn't broken. I was tired. But I was whole. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation to a charity gala hosted by the local business council. My grandfather's name was being honored posthumously. A legacy award. I almost declined. But I went. Not for the speech or the applause. Not for the table seating or the catered meal. I went to sit in the room he had once sat in. To occupy it fully. Not as a stand-in for his legacy, but as its continuation. People approached me. They said things like, "He would have been proud. You handled this with dignity." We were watching. And I just nodded. Because I didn't need recognition. I needed closure. Near the end of the night, a woman approached me. I recognized her face but couldn't place it until she said her name, Evelyn. My grandfather's longtime accountant. She handed me a small envelope. She said, "He asked me to give you this. Only if everything's settled." Inside was a single index card. On it, in his familiar writing. "Amber. They will always try to rewrite what they couldn't control. Let them talk. You'll still be standing." I folded the card and slipped it into my clutch. Later that night, I walked alone through the empty parking lot, heels in hand, moonlight stretching across the asphalt. The wind shifted. And I knew the storm had passed. But something else was coming. Peace doesn't come in a parade. It comes quietly, in the way you breathe when no one's watching. I returned home from the gala with the note still tucked against my palm. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. The words had already etched themselves into me, not like a brand, but like a seam. A reminder of where things had once been split, and where I had chosen to stitch them back. The weeks that followed were ordinary in a way I hadn't felt in years. The chaos was over. But I wasn't the same woman who had sat at that first meeting, stunned and silent. Something had shed. Something had formed. My days grew slow again, intentional. I started walking each morning before the sun rose, not for clarity, I'd already found that, but for stillness. For space to let the weight settle in ways that wouldn't crush me. At first, I didn't tell anyone where the money went. Not the full truth. Not even Emily knew all of it. But in quiet installments, I made decisions. The trust was revised to include a scholarship fund for the children of the company's employees, not just tuition, but mentoring, internship placement, financial literacy training. Real tools. Real chances. That was the word I kept circling back to. Chance. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about the possibility of something better surviving you. I could have held on to the money. Let it accumulate. Let it grow in silence, untouched. But that would have been fear talking. And I was done being afraid of what generosity would cost me. I still remembered how it felt to sit in those rooms as a girl, hearing voices rise through the walls. Arguments about what someone was owed. About who deserved what and why. As if worth could be weighed only in proximity to power. I remember the way my mother would smile at guests while tightening her grip beneath the table. The way she weaponized need. The way she told us stories about our own childhood that made us question our memories. It took years for me to realize that her survival came at the cost of our clarity. Now, I protect clarity like its currency. I kept the house. But I didn't live there. I opened it once a month for meetings, small gatherings with young entrepreneurs, local women building family-run businesses, legacy planners who wanted to learn how to protect their work from inside sabotage. I didn't stand at the front of the room. I sat in the back. I let them lead. Because what I inherited wasn't a fortune. It was the responsibility to make sure that no one had to fight this hard to do the right thing again. Rachel reached out eventually. Just a card. No apology, not exactly. Just a few lines. I see it now. I don't know what else to say. I didn't write back. I wasn't angry. Just finished. Jason and I had coffee a few months later. He didn't bring up the past. He didn't have to. We talked about work, the weather, the subtle ache of realizing your childhood had been a stage set for someone else's drama. He said, "You didn't let it define you." I replied, "I let it shape me." That was enough. Craig never resurfaced. My mother stayed silent. That was the hardest part to explain to anyone who asked. That silence, too, can be violence. That her refusal to speak, to reckon, to ask or answer, was its own form of erasure. But I stopped needing answers from her. Because the longer you chase closure from someone who trades in absence, the more you forget how whole you already are. I keep my grandfather's last note inside a frame now. Not on the wall. On a shelf, near the window, where the afternoon light hits it. It's not for show. It's for remembrance. Because every time I see it, I remember the version of me who sat on that kitchen floor with the laptop open, heart trembling from what she had uncovered. I remember how she didn't flinch. How she kept going. How she chose not revenge, but restoration. And I remember that legacy isn't about what's left behind. It's about what you choose to carry forward. The story ends quietly. No headlines. No courtroom drama. No final confrontation where someone shouts and someone weeps. Just me, here, still. Choosing every day to be the person he believed I already was. And sometimes, late at night, I think of that house before it was mine. The way the floors creaked, the way the wind curled around the porch columns. I think of the little girl I was, sitting on the staircase, listening through walls. And I want to tell her. You heard it all. And one day, you'll know exactly what to do with it.